On. Awesome. So we're here today to talk about settings, and we had a very extensive conversation, I think, in Slack last week about settings for secure. Where do we put this? What's happening there? And I think today I just wanted to kind of like touch base with you and try to understand a little bit more about what you're doing and explain what I'm trying to do with the settings, which is pretty much trying to understand the problem and seeing how other designers are also planning new features proposal and new improvements for settings, but also looking at the research that we had in the past and the insights that we've collected over the last year or so, especially now with navigation research that can influence the improvements that we want to do for settings. So that's why I have that gigantic epic with, I don't know, 100 issues. They're like settings UX, and they're in different buckets, but so far I've been talking to designers to, as I say, understand the problem and then see if we can come up with related themes or topics so that we can help management to prioritize some of these improvements, and also, yeah, maybe different opportunities related to pajamas, patterns, etc. So that's my story. Yeah, and if you want to share a little bit about what's happening in Plan and Insecure.
Why don't you take it away, Becca, because you probably have done more settings work than I have.
Yeah, so this has come up a couple times recently, needs for different settings. And there's, you know, SAST and DAST and license compliance and container scanning, and then there's a defend side of things. So there's a bunch of us, and it's kind of tricky to stay on top of what everybody is working on because we're a little bit siloed within our groups, and then there's a lot of things that are shared because we're all working with the vulnerability list, or it's currently called the project security dashboard. There's the group security dashboard. There's the instance level security dashboard. And then there's a configuration page where everything lives. And so, yeah, it's been a little bit of a challenge to try to stay on top of what everybody is doing, but then also still have time to work on our own stuff, but then be aware of what everybody else is doing, because if somebody makes a change to one of the shared pages, then, you know, we all have to be aware. And so things are starting to pop up. Camille's been working on some things with DAST, and yeah, where do I want to go with this? I'm trying to give you enough information, but not too much either. There are definitely settings needs that have come up for all of us. When it comes to security, you are also talking about compliance, and so there's a lot of companies that want to enforce, you know, security jobs running on every single pipeline, or you know, for certain projects that are have sensitive customer data, you don't want to let developers merge code to the production branch if there are critical or high vulnerabilities that the pipeline turned up. And so there are security teams that want to enforce, you know, either not letting code go to production if there are high risk vulnerabilities on it, or at least enable things like security approvers to review, because there could be a critical vulnerability that comes up that is a false positive as well. And so anyways, there's a lot of compliance that comes with the world of security. And so we want to let people set those policies. And we've played around. I mean, I don't think we have our terminology down yet, whether it's a security policy, whether it's a setting. But what I've started to do is, I'll just share my screen real quick. So I opened up this settings for secure and defend issue. So everything is housed in here, all the links that I'm about to show you. So I started this Google spreadsheet because there's a lot of epics that contain a lot of issues across all the groups, across secure and defend. So I kind of wanted them to be in one place. And on the left, trying to call out what group is leading this, this requirement. And TI is threat insights, but they also, so that's like the security dashboards that we have. It also touches on all of the groups. So I said all / threat insights, because all of the scanners feed into that security dashboard. And then you have the settings, notes, whether that setting would live at the project group or instance level. A lot of the time it needs to exist at all levels. And then, you know, what problem are we trying to solve? And then the related issues over here. So I've asked all of the groups across Secure and Defend to add whatever settings needs they currently have or see themselves having in the near future. And then I took those into a mural, and basically I think it could be broken down by two. There were different ways to, like, I did some affinity diagramming in here. So there were a couple of ways to think about these: by persona, by jobs to be done. I tried also by location, like, is this touching on the merge request, the pipeline page, is it vulnerability management? That didn't work because some things spread across a couple different areas. But long story short, what I ended up with was there's policy or security enforcement settings needs, and then there's workflow preferences needs, and then there's a tertiary category of scanner configuration, which is kind of like settings, but it's also kind of separate from the other ones. So policy or security enforcement will be things like, you know, you want to require that jobs run on every pipeline. You want to require a comment on a vulnerability dismissal, or you know, there's no current way to enforce SLAs, service level agreements. So I just wrapped up a SaaS jobs to be done research initiative, and from that we validated that developers, their primary goal is to ship code and meet their milestones or meet their deadlines. They're just trying to ship code, and a lot of them see security as a barrier to that, or a hurdle. And then you have the security team, it's a different title across different companies: security champion, security analyst, security engineer. But their primary goal is to make sure that the developers are shipping safe code that don't have those loopholes for hackers to get in and exploit, you know, sensitive data. So there's a little bit of friction there between those two personas that we work with. And a lot of the time the developers just want to ship code and worry about security stuff later, whereas the security people are saying, no, we've got to do this before it gets into production. And so these policy enforcement things are more the security team, making sure that the developers aren't skipping that step, making sure that they're following company policies. But then there's also things like workflow preferences. So some of our scanners have offer up solutions when there are vulnerabilities detected. And so one possibility is that they could, GitLab can auto-create a merge request when solutions are available. That may or may not be something they want to do. It's not a security enforcement thing. It's more of a preference. There's also auto-resolve if vulnerabilities are no longer detected. Some companies want to want that vulnerability to persist, even if the pipeline runs again and it's not found. Others don't. And so this is less of like security enforcement or policy and more of like a preference. Custom definition of risk score. That's, we assign different grades for how at risk we think a project is on the group security dashboard. We say this project has no critical or high vulnerabilities, and so we're going to give this an A, or there's a lot of these open, we're going to give it an F, but people want to be able to adjust what that means to their company and customize it. So that's kind of more of a preference. And then there's this other world of scanner configuration. So with SAST, we just implemented being able to customize the SaaS job that runs in the pipeline, being able to set different thresholds within there, being able to schedule scans so that a project isn't out of date, but if there's no pipelines run, there's still security jobs that run on it, let's say once a month or whatever. So those are kind of the three buckets that I've identified. We live in this very complicated security world, so I don't know how much of that makes sense or what other questions you may have, but
you clarify a bunch of questions I had around like what your personas were and if you had any main jobs to be done already in place. So it's impressive to see that.
So each group kind of has their own jobs to be done. There is a lot of redundancy when it comes to things like vulnerability management. So we know that, ideally there is the security jobs that run, they say, A, there's a vulnerability here. B, we know exactly how to fix it. All you have to do is, here's a patch, or all you have to do is upgrade to 13.2 and you're on 13.0, but this upgrade is going to fix that for you. So that's something that, we know that everybody wants. Nobody necessarily wants to look into what is this vulnerability? How risky is it? How can I solve it? So if there are solutions available from the scanners that we use, great. They all love that. So there's going to be some redundancies between our jobs to be done. There's other things that are a little bit more specific to the DAST world or the SAST world. So if that answers your question.
Where can users go today to do configuration or doing settings in the configure capability?
Today you have to go into the YAML file and then you'd create a merge request to adjust those things. What we're trying to do is, so there's kind of two efforts running in parallel. One, we're saying, here are all of the analyzers we use. We use about 12 open source analyzers as part of GitLab's SAST offering. And then we run all of those analyzers through we add a GitLab filter onto it for consistency, because they all have their own kind of definitions as to what a critical vulnerability is. We want to present it as something more consistent. So there is a GitLab filter on top of all of those analyzers. So you can customize that filter, or you can customize the individual analyzers. And what we're doing by bringing SAST configuration UI into GitLab is we're offering some guidance on here's what this variable is. We can even set thresholds. We can do some logic checks, like, oh, you have this variable set at this, but this one set at this. There's a conflict there, rather than just like them going into the YAML file and changing some things. They may not know that there is something wrong or something conflicting within those variables until a pipeline runs and they get an error and they're not sure where that error came from. So we're really trying to guide them at the same time that we're helping them customize the SAST analyzers. There's also a vulnerability research team, and there's a proprietary SAST GitLab SaaS scanner that is in the works that would replace the open source scanners that we currently use. And that's exciting because then we have more control over false positives. If you talk to anybody in the security space, false positives comes up as a huge pain point because they have to dig through all of these things that may or may not be real. And it's a huge pain point because it's so time consuming to determine what's real from what's not. And so we'll be able to have more control over the proprietary scanner. So that may launch some point in 2021, but we're trying to improve what we currently are working with before we can launch that, if that makes sense.
It's so interesting, kind of sidebar. I'm working on like a 3-year vision for release, and we just want the security and all the vulnerabilities to appear like in your pre-deployment phase, and you have like a runbook that everything's automated, and some of the things that you say, I'm gonna connect a sync later, but they fit right into what we want to inject in the releases and the deployment of the application. So it's super interesting to see that you did all this investigation. Other than settings, we can collaborate in different aspects there. So that's super interesting.
Yeah, and I think the last thing I'll say about all of this is thinking about permissions. I mean, so you don't want, to let developers go in here and turn things off because it's making their job harder. We want to be able to enforce policies or let companies enforce their security policies. So permissions is a really interesting thing when it comes to this. We've had some discussions, do we need a security permissions role, or how might we restrict some of these things to a maintainer level? That's something that we haven't really solved for yet. I think we need to do some more problem validation on that as well, and just gather more information about about that. But it could be tricky to let anybody go in here and change these things. That said, for an MVC, I don't think it's the highest. I think letting users set these policies is more important than restricting. I don't think it's dangerous per se to release it to everybody, because we have things like, Git blame, or, we can keep track of who changed it and when. So if they do need to go back and say like, hey, we're supposed to be requiring security jobs to run in every pipeline, what happened here, that there's some kind of accountability in it. I think that's fine. But in the future, we may want to look more closely at permissions-based settings.
I think it's a lot of, especially when it comes to the UI, there's a lot we can already leverage from what's in the product. In release management, we are also defaulting everything to the permissions that are set in the group level. So for example, with the protected branches at the project level, we just replicate the behavior at the group or things cascade. I understand like that the MVC is really the ability, right, to be able to set these things in the product. It's super cool. Alexis, do you want to jump into it? Because I saw you added a lot of things to the agenda. I'm curious.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is all kind of like hypothetical, more high level. I mean, I myself haven't touched settings a whole lot, and I think within the plan stage, we really want to take things out of settings rather than add them. Not that like you're proposing that, but that has always been a struggle. Like, don't add it to settings. Let's think of what else we can do here. And things aren't quite as risky as some like secure, for example. So we're lucky in that sense, I suppose. Yeah, that's a good insight. That is, anytime we propose something go in settings, it's like, that is a lot of pushback, and that's fair. Like, I'm glad we're thinking about that. We want to make things more contextual. We want to take away those clicks and not make people navigate to a new page anytime they want to view, you know, a new work item, that kind of thing. We're really emphasizing that. Within settings itself, I struggled to think of what I had challenges with in the past within Plan, because like I said, we haven't touched it a whole lot. When we started thinking of, yeah, I'm just watching you type. When we started thinking about what was at the time boxes, and then morphed into iterations, I was ideating on like where that would live. Basically the idea of you have this time box of a milestone. If we add in more time boxes, how would you access that? How would you allow users to configure which ones they use? Is there an area in settings where they maybe think through that? We're also thinking about issue types, and that's more on the project management side, but you might have seen that work Amelia did, where if you create a new issue now, you have the type of either an issue or an incident. And we're probably going to be expanding that into, you know, like maybe a bug or a feature, almost making those templates more high level where they're a type. And in the future, maybe it's like all of issuables. And maybe when you're creating a new object, it's more like, is this an epic type? Is this a requirements type? Is this an issue, right? So kind of creating a like a higher level work item there. And we're thinking that, again, you may want to configure some of those objects in settings, right? A lot of configuration stuff, I think, is what I'm coming into. Kind of like, what does your team care about? How does your team plan? And, you know, what is their methodology, right? Like what items, because we're so flexible, we allow users access to many different, you know, ways of planning. So it's kind of like, how do you plan? What do you use? Do you use weight? Do you use this, that? And focusing more on issue types, maybe that could even morph into like configuring your issue types beyond templates, right? Like a mega template, like an epic, or even like starting with just a high level work item, and you define like this kind of work item has this widget within it, and maybe that widget is the epic tree, but maybe you also want like related, or like maybe you don't want to see any conversations there, so you don't add the discussions widget, you know. So we're thinking about that very high level right now. It's kind of hard to talk about, I suppose, but making, again, the idea of configuration and where would that live, and that might live in settings. And to Becca's point, you know, you probably want some permissions there around that, like who defines these different types and who defines templates, who defines the widgets. Let me go back to the agenda. Yeah, and Service Desk, worked on that a tiny bit, the tiniest bit, but just making that more discoverable because it's powerful. It's in the nav now, but turning it on and off, I think that's, I don't know, that could always be improved. Saving changes, not being obvious, that's just something personally I ran into, like the idea that you're filling out this form and I always just want to like navigate away, but I don't notice that there's this save changes button at the bottom. So I would like some friction there as I try to navigate away, that, hey, this wasn't saved yet, because it's not super obvious. And then kind of just like you put brainstorm opportunities. So just things I've been thinking about in general. First, I guess the idea of groups versus projects is always kind of a sticking point to users. And we have a working group. I'm not part of it, but we do have a working group looking into that. And I think Daniel's even doing that scorecard, so that's going to be helpful here. And then consistency. Yeah, this would be actually the working group is for projects and groups. Sorry, I'm just kind of like going on a tangent here.
I'm following the right
yeah. But yeah, consistency between issues and epics in general. And what I mean here is that obviously issues are more mature, but they're similar objects, and you know there's there's different things in settings for issues that you can configure that you can't for epics yet. So I think for MVC, just make sure these are more consistent, right? Like where it makes sense. But it also, again, kind of does go back to that challenge of epics are group level. So, you know, what does that mean for that consistency? And then templating ties into that as well. Issue templates exist, and similar to I think what Becca was talking about, like they're kind of complicated, especially for users who like maybe Parkers. I don't know if they're going to be going into the repo and merging things in all the time. I'm not sure that our model of creating a template really makes sense for some of the users, right? We're kind of like creating markdown files and like going into this like template directory. So that could be an area for improvement, I think. And also, you know, making the epic templates even exist, if that makes sense. Configuration options for issues and epics. I kind of touched on this, and it kind of goes back to the widgeting, right? But is there, you know, again, we're so flexible with how we allow people to plan. How might a user turn off, let's say, wait for their issues because they don't use it, right? Like their team doesn't use it. The sidebar already has a lot in it. And I'm not sure if that would live in settings, but it possibly could. Again, back to like the permissions and like, you know, you're templating things there, maybe it would work. Notifications, we have that at the moment, but you know, we all know what's going on with notifications. But within settings, you could basically disable the emails. But maybe we think a little further there. The issues can be disabled. I think this one's interesting. So like, again, kind of back to the configuration, right? Like we sort of allow it in different places. And you can say that, hey, my team doesn't even use issues, so I don't even want to see it in the nav, I'm disabling it. I think that's kind of an interesting thing. And I think we could maybe push that even further. For example, like maybe I don't know, this is more of a growth question, I would think, but it might be interesting to think about how we configure the nav based on the persona or the teams using it. And again, does that belong in settings? I don't know, maybe, right? But that's kind of an interesting thing to think through. And what does it mean if I turn off all of issues? Because currently, if I turn off issues, things like labels live in issues. So what is, like, if I'm turning off issues, then can I use labels and merge requests, right? So it ties into, I would say, again, probably the growth team, but thinking through the nav in general, and thinking how to configure the nav, you know, the left-hand nav, and also kind of sidebar, you know, which we don't have, but I think that could be interesting. I think that's, you know, that's a lot, but but yeah, it's all kind of like high level. I haven't really tactically dug into the nav yet because I've probably rightfully been kind of discouraged to do so. We're trying to make things more contextual, but, and again, it's not as risky as like things like secure, where it's very highly permissions based, and here it's like, you know, you might miss a template and it's not the end of the world, so it's not really bad. Yeah.
But still, it's like especially when it comes to navigation, everyone will be affected, and that's why setting is so interesting and so tied to the navigation research and the things that our teams are doing, because they go together. And I think at Jeff, maybe really one of the actual cases, he mentioned something like, you know, the minimal change will have like a huge impact because everyone will be affected with this. So yeah, important in a different level for sure. And a lot of the things that you still hear, I was like, yes. The templates we are doing also in release management, and I'm like, where do I go to set up this new issue type template? We want executable runbooks, so give users the ability to not only apply a template, but to customize it and run live code in this issue type. That is not an issue per se, but you work like it, right? Because you should be able to allow it to like apply it to a project or apply it to specific deployment, or, you know, use feature flags with it, etc. And there's a lot of questions also on my side on how do we even configure these things at the group level when they cascade to multiple projects. And what I found right now is that, yeah, just replicating the settings is very painful. And I usually do what to do, Alexa, is I don't go to settings. I just let's do on the CI file first, right? Then we figure it out. I think that's one of the pain points right now for, I don't know, it doesn't really help to standardize the experience, I guess. That's awesome.
Yeah, and you mentioned like you hit the nail on the head where I think a lot of the pain points too, again, I'll harp on it, but like the group and projects, right? Where it's like, even if you feel like you're successful and you set up something for a project, you might, or, you know, you might not realize you're not in a group. I mean, there's just so much going on there. So
Exactly. So like how things cascade, right, more or less. And for pajamas, have you put any thought on what we lack today, or how can we have, I don't know, higher level guidelines, maybe assets, things that will help us bring consistency? Because I think there's two big problems from the conversations I've been having with our design team. It is indeed the overall settings cleanup that we need to do that involves the information architecture and all the standards and the differentiation between, you know, contextual settings with like the feature settings with general settings, where do they live, etc. But I'm also hearing some comments on pajamas, or how can we build some sort of you know, guidelines for settings. So it's a broad question, but I kind of wanted to hear like what your thoughts are on that, and if you had any challenges in the past building settings and using a source of truth, like with pajamas and the product.
the patterns just look, again, I'm not like tactically working on these often, but the patterns are kind of seem old or outdated. Or like I'm wondering if we've moved away from some of these. And I kind of, like I said, the save changes, the expand collapse button, just like little nitpicky things like that. I kind of wonder about, and if I were to start working on something in settings, I'd wonder like, would I have to take on the effort to improve this? Or, you know, so I'd wonder what that single source of truth was too, probably. Like, is this the intended pattern? Have we moved away from it? But Becca, you probably have a better understanding of this than I, because you are in this in Figma. What do you think?
Well, I guess I'm not making a direct connection between pajamas and settings. Can you say more about, so we're talking about the settings within pajamas?
Yeah, more as in pajamas right now, we do have guidelines for how the components behave, right? For here's the expand collapse, here's the button. And other designers, they share that they would like to have guidelines for how settings should work. So more broader guidelines that fit it's kind of like a page layout. I don't know, just something that, you know, for the section, per section in the product. But also standards for example, how does it work with the expand collapse? How does it work with search in settings? You know, where should settings live when you have a new section? Where does it go? So it's not really search settings in pajamas website, but how can pajamas support us in designing more settings consistently?
Yeah, I think I came across a link in your settings UX epic that led to Dovetail with some findings there. That was really, really fascinating. I feel like any designers working on settings should definitely consume those findings. So things like not knowing which category something might fit into. I saw a couple of people have said that they thought it was under merge requests, but it was actually under general, you know, something like that is really interesting. And it got me thinking about that we might need a search bar. And then what does settings search look like? I don't know if that follows the the search of, you know, the GitLab search, or if like that interaction, does it suggest, where this might live based on keywords, or what that looks like. I have no idea. I would love some guidance on how search within that might work. Yeah, I mean, I'm somebody who really insists on like consistency across any product. And so, working in silos could be really dangerous while still acknowledging that there could be some intricacies to every stage or within every group. But things like having a general bucket, could be interesting in some stages, but not in others. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Alexa's bringing up the collapse thing is like a whole other topic. Now I'm thinking about that because for SaaS configuration UI, I was using the collapse expand container, and then that was just deprecated, I guess, or we're supposed to be moving away from that. And so I just rebuilt it using the accordion, but then it's like, does all of this text have to be blue? And then I have like an icon in blue that leads to the docs, and it looks like it's one CTA when it's actually two, because they're all blue. The caret, the title, and the question mark icon is all blue, and so it looks like one thing. And yeah. And I just wanted to like ask, can I just make the title like gray 900, so then it looks like separate CTAs? And then Jeremy commented my issue. He's like, what if this is a stepper? And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so much work. But yes, like I can definitely consider that. So long story short, I guess I'm just thinking out loud here. I'd be interested in knowing how the other teams are organizing their settings. Hopefully something like search is consistent. I would love some guidelines on how search would work. Search may not be required for all of them too, depending on how many settings and how many buckets there are.
This is very interesting because we do have, like what you're saying, the expand collapse, and what was it? Was the accordion, and now it's collapsible, or vice versa, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely one of the pain points right now that we have with the unfinished components, is that they are very, very basic. So if you really want to replace it, for example, in settings, it's going to affect every single settings page, right? So
yeah.
One little, like the title is like what, 16 pixels, 16 points, the header. And then indeed, I don't think we have, I don't know how should that work in context with multiple collapsibles, things like that. And I know that we have in the past, I think it's in general, settings general, that's just an example, is that the first item is expanded, but it's only in that one page. And that was because Catherine told me that there was research done in the past, and they identified that users would like to see the most relevant settings area or settings section in the page expanded, but then that didn't scale. They didn't really implement this change across the board. So what I'm hearing right now is that it would be interesting knowing that how other teams are defining this pattern, so that you could replicate it, right, more efficiently in your designs, in your proposals. But also, and correct me if I'm wrong, I also hear that the issue of using things that are not ready yet, or components or parts of the UI, right? Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, I think something else that would be really helpful for pajamas to determine is how save works. I've seen some designs in I know Kyle just is working on something where in Defend for alerts, where a drawer opens and you can change the status of an alert, and there's no save button. So, but then there are other places in GitLab where you have to click save for something to save. And so, yeah, for settings, I'm thinking of as soon as you change something, is it saved automatically? Is there something like a toast notification or something, you know, under the text input that says, you know, save, or is it just assumed? Or, you know, are there rules for sometimes you need a save button and other times you don't because it's just implicitly saved?
Yeah, I had the same issue, Becca, when I was working on this, like really quickly. You know, how do you save a title within the sidebar if you're editing a issue title within a sidebar? Like, what does that look like? And I looked at settings and I was like, oh, there's no, like, we don't really have that kind of validation for saving and then perhaps navigating away. Yeah. And I thought you brought up like a really great point about the categories, Becca, too. Because I wonder, Becca. Okay. I wonder about that too.
You want to move?
And then also the idea of, I think you brought this up, Anna, like contextual settings. Like I could see 3 levels of that, right? Like contextual to the page or like area you're looking at, or contextual to even like the navigational item where security and compliance has this sort of. And then there's also like the settings here. So like there's at least 3 levels that I see. And then maybe within the object itself. So Becca, you're having fun. I love it.
I'm sorry. I'm I'm having a blast going to get my charger from the other room.
I've just been watching people walk back and forth, and I'm like, they're so
I know.
cute. I love their family.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that was mom and dad. I don't think you were sharing your screen there. It sounds like you were pointing at something.
Oh, was I? And I wasn't sharing. Of course, I wasn't. Yeah, I was just showing this where there's like a configuration area here.
Yeah.
Right, and then there's like a settings here, and then like, you know, maybe you're within your own page, or maybe within an object even. So there's so many layers of I'm saying security settings that some guidance there would be kind of helpful, right? Like what level does this live at, this settings area, which I think would be determined by the designer working on it, sort of, but like guidance would be helpful.
Yeah, and also another point I've heard quite often was the ability to go to a different setting area, right? Even if you're in like in a specific product or a page of a feature, if you need to do a change in the settings, then you don't need to go to the navigation to find that information, right? Just so that we are able to kind of link everything like full circle, and not because I think right now what happens is that when people have to configure something, they go to Google and they search configuring CI pipelines or whatever. Then the documentation is going to tell them that they have to go back to the project, open the settings, do this and that. I think that will be a good opportunity for us to also provide this type of guidelines that will empower designers to make more informed decisions. Because sometimes it feels that you're adding a button there, but then, oh shit, there's no one is telling me that I can do that, or it's going to break the pattern. I see that happen quite often, at least with my work.
Yeah, so I'm curious, like from the work that you've done so far, I mean, I could see both mental models of like, okay, I need to go to settings and I want to see the settings across my project, or I want to see the settings across this group. And I want to make sure that security has these things set up and CI/CD has these things set up. And I am in a settings mode in my brain right now. And I just want to see all the settings. I could also see, you know, I'm in, you know, more persona based, where I am a security analyst, and I just want to see settings for security and compliance. So I'm going to go to security and compliance, and then what settings do I have within that? Bye, Alexis. She gets a drop. But yes, I don't know what's right there. And it could be that they're both correct for different people. I imagine that project owners or you know, high level, like C-level executives may just want to go and see what is going on within security. I don't know about, you know, I'm very much in the security world, so I can't speak for the other stages or the other parts of the product, but I could see that, you know, there's a head security guy at the company and he just wants to see what's going on with projects and what are their security policies that they have in place. I don't think that person necessarily is also caring about settings and other things, but I mean, maybe it's all tied in. I mean, that is what GitLab is, right? It's CI/CD, it's all of these things integrated. So do you have any thoughts about that? Like what that mental model is?
I have more questions than thoughts.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah. In release management, I work with a variety of personas, and I work with people that are technical. So there's personas that they're going to the CI file that they're going to configure, I think much like what your personas are, some of them, and they're going to configure everything on CLI. But then I also have these people that are release managers, or they're marketing people, or they just, you know, writing a release blog post, whatever. They don't really care about the code, the configuration. They want everything to be set up for them. But what I see right now is that because we assume that they don't care about the configuration, we also don't tell them why things are the way they are. So I don't know, there is you want to enable a feature flag in your project, but it's set up at the group level. And right now you don't even know where that comes from, right? So I don't really have any solutions for that, because we do have quite a lot of insights from different stage groups on that. And I think the challenge right now is to collect this information and make like an informed decision on what is a low-hanging fruit for settings, right? I think, kind of sidebar as well, I think it's the information architecture is defining, like, you know, what is a group setting, what is a contextual setting, what is a, and from there we can start feeding back all those questions that we have that are related to specific personas and jobs to be done, and then look at the scenarios as well. But yeah, it's a bit more complicated than what it looks like.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point. I mean, originally I was thinking, you know, if we wanted to make this more permissions based, it makes more sense to have it in the settings menu, because you have to be, what is it, a maintainer or above to a maintainer, a project owner, admin to see settings in the nav. So that would restrict, you know, a developer level from being able to adjust those settings. However, if a developer who has developer permissions level is wondering where is this coming from, it might be interesting for them to be able to go into settings and see, okay, there's this security approvals thing set up. Here are the available, you know, settings, or I can see that it's set to if a critical or high or unknown level severity, or severity level vulnerability. That's why I'm getting these checks, because they may assume that it's just a critical level, but we're also tying in unknown, because unknown is a severity that we offer. It could be critical, but we just don't have the information to determine that. So we throw unknown in with critical and high on the security checks or the security approvals. But so they may say, like, why am I blocked on an unknown? Is everything okay?
Firework.
A firework?
Yeah.
Is it a holiday there?
No idea. Almost weekend.
That was random. Okay, I'm glad you're safe. But yeah, I mean, so they may not know, and then it's like, who do I reach out to find this out? I could see developers in Slack like, why am I being blocked on this? Whereas if there was a settings area, it might be interesting for them to go in there. They may not change it. Maybe we need to give people more credit, and they may not change it just to like get rid of it so they're unblocked, but it would provide that information of, oh, that's why I'm being blocked on this.
Yeah. In app, right? Because I think that it's and give them, for example, the solution. Because right now you point to a lot of documentation, you go to settings, there's more information, click here, go there. But then how do I solve this right now? Or, you know, who is this a system admin that needs to help me? Is it like, I think I love this conversation today, because I think it's interesting to see how the problems overlap and how we could potentially come up with, I think, quick wins and small, boring solutions to at least, if not necessarily implement these changes right now, but at least say, hey, this is what we have right now. And here are some ideas of how can we improve not only the consistency, but also the overall experience with settings. Because if we can roll that out, for example, in secure, and then we just implement a similar pattern in release management, which will also cascade to CI, which will cascade to, and yeah, it makes everybody happy. Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
So, I guess I have a lot of information today.
Yeah, I know. I'm not envious of being in your position right now. Like, oh my gosh, we're throwing everything at you, and then you get to try to figure out what the takeaways are and how to proceed. A lot.
But the themes repeat a lot. What I've been hearing is really like information architecture, discoverability, lack of patterns, and pajamas, as in give me an asset, give me a template, like a starting point for this, and like what we discussed now at the end, what do I do if I find problem X, right? Not like here, use this component, it expands and collapses, but in what context? And I think when it comes to settings, it's one of the things I think a bit more difficult than navigation, because navigation, we just throw things at it, but we can reorder, we can just but with settings, we keep adding more and more different functionalities, and like the autosave. You go to the same page, there's 2 ways of saving the content. So I'm glad that we had a chance to catch up. And I think my next step here is really just grab all this info, put them in buckets. And if you have like any issues, I know you shared the, I think it's an epic. What is it? No, this setting secure and defend. I have just one. But if you have any other issues that you think they are interesting, and also the board, the mural board, that'll be super cool. Then I can. And about this,
I linked to the mural and the spreadsheet that I have with the links to the epics and the issues in there. I can also just put the links directly in the agenda.
Yes, I see here the spreadsheet. Let me just add.
Yeah, so there's a ton of epics and issues in there that all relate to that. And then I pinged you in my issue yesterday because Nicole Schwartz, who's a PM for software composition analysis. I don't know if you saw that, but she pinged me and said, hey, just so you know, we're working on this settings thing. And
okay. Yeah, pinged. Okay, I'm gonna have a look.
let me see.
And if you feel like just feel free to add anything to this epic. By all means, go ahead and add the content if you think it's going to be useful.
Okay.
I'm gonna reorder some things hopefully tomorrow, and I'll try to summarize all these findings, because I think I talked to, I don't know, many people already, maybe 7 designers, and I think that's enough.
Okay, but it's good for me to know. It sounds like we're moving towards each stage or group kind of owning their own settings rather than everything going under the settings bucket.
Yeah, I don't think there's no decision so far.
Okay.
I think what I want to do is not even come up with a proposal, but it's really from the the shared pain points and the shared solutions that, the common solutions that we discussed, come up with, I'm calling buckets, these buckets of, okay, this could be a potential low-hanging fruit. Because there's two challenges, maybe three or four challenges right now, is that, yeah, we can come up with the design decisions, but we need people to implement it. And I think it's difficult to push it forward if we don't have like what navigation, like a clear ownership, right? Of, yeah, here we are doing investigation, we are doing validation, this team is going to implement it. That's why I think my gut feeling tells me right now is that it would be nice to start from a design with the design decisions, right? So that we can, yeah, influence ourselves in a way and say, hey, next time we were, building settings, use this pattern, or let's try it out with the. So that's one thing. And another one, I think, I'm not sure if you saw in the, let me share my screen, in the epic that I created. I have here a list of what I call the themes. I created a bucket with bugs, features, and the research or the feature requests and the big changes. And here you can see like all, or the bugs that I could find that have settings and UX added to them. So if we could potentially start fixing these bugs, and then, while we make decisions on the re-architecture or redesign of settings, we can already solve a lot of problems like of existing inconsistency. So if you also want to talk to your PM and say, hey, there's, I don't know, 3 settings bugs here in secure, they're quick wins. They really don't need any UX. So by all means, pick it up and try to convince them to implement these changes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So bottom line, let's see where this goes. And then I'll make sure I'll share like the overview with the UX team. We have on Tuesday the UX call, but I'll keep you posted.
Cool. And one other thing I'll say on the mental model thing, I could even see settings living within each state. Well, I speak for the other stages and where it might live, and if that makes sense. But for security and compliance, I mean, we're going to have a lot of settings needs, and so I think for us, anyways, it makes sense to have our own settings area, especially because we have a configuration page, and they're kind of linked, settings and configuration. So I've even started playing around with some ideas where there's a settings tab on our configuration page because there is a relationship there. But I could see I think it would be great to account for both mental models and both pathways. So I'm in security and compliance. What are the settings that I have here? But also I want to see settings across this project or across this instance. How can I go to general settings and see what all of them are? And then if I want to adjust anything, then I'm taken to that area to do it, or they exist in both somehow. But I think it would be potentially one solution could be not to have to choose. Is it settings down and then into the area that I'm looking for? Or is it the area and then settings of that area, but to account for both, I think could be cool.
Yeah, for sure. And I love I think I think it's in Secure where some of the dashboards, you can actually do some configuration, right? On the view. Is that Secure or is it?
On the instance level dashboard, you can edit the dashboard. Basically, you're putting projects into the instance or removing them. I don't know if that's what you're referring to.
Yeah. Oh, that's new. The sidebar. Was this here before?
No, yeah, that is new.
Okay, awesome. So you change, it's not like in the modal or on this page. Now there's a sidebar. Okay, yeah.
Right.
So see, exactly. If you go to more in, you have environments, operations, and security dashboards. So if you go to the operations dashboards, it's pretty much the same thing as the environments dashboard. Different data, but it's the same user experience. And then in the beginning, let me share my screen because maybe for the viewers, you're gonna want to see a little bit what I'm talking about. Here, I was here, right? This is the one that you're talking about, instance level.
Yeah.
And this is the settings where you can add projects.
Yeah, it's weird though, because that's like it's like a view thing and not like a settings thing in the context of which I'm looking at settings, right? So I don't know how we're going to account for that when we have settings as in policies.
Yeah.
But it's a different type of setting. So we're going to have to think about that.
And when you go, for example, the environments, this is mine. This is, you go to add projects and it's pretty much the same view.
Yeah.
In line. And this is, I think, the lack of consistency. And then you have here, you know, when you go to operations, it's the same UI.
Yeah, I feel like the projects that are in the instance should just be like at the top of the page or something. I don't think we need a separate settings area for that. So I think once we have settings as in policies, we'll be able to reuse that settings thing. And move the projects that are in the settings that are in the instance somewhere else. But yeah, that's
keep me posted, because I think that especially if you're moving with validation, you get, you know, I don't know, a good valid feedback and insights from users. This is definitely something that we should roll out, especially with dashboards and configuration.
Yeah. And I'm going to be looking at dashboards too, in terms of what widgets we should have at the dashboard on each level, instance, group, and project. That's a really big initiative too. Like, do different personas want different widgets? Can we just set up, can we determine guidelines for how to build a widget and like the structure of a widget, and then let each group kind of create their own widgets, and then let the user customize their dashboards based on what widgets are relevant for their role. I've worked on dashboards a lot before at my previous company, so I feel like I have like a running start on some of this, but that's kind of settings related, but it's more like view settings rather than like how things run settings. Yeah.
And we also do release management, the group level dashboard for a director. So I think we discussed this briefly in previous milestones. There was some exchange of messages of dashboards, but it's back in the backlog. But I'll definitely get in touch with you because I know that you folks move much faster when it comes to dashboards and secure. And awesome, Becca. This was awesome.
Yes, thank you for working at night. It looks like it's dinner time there now, so I will let you go. But
I'll post this to Unfiltered, and then I'll share with the team.
Sounds good. Thanks for doing all of this.
Awesome. All right.
All
Have
right.
a nice rest of your day.
You too. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.